A Japanese kitchen can get through a whole summer without one single plug. Not because the heat isn't real, but because nobody in that kitchen is fighting it head on. I grew up watching my grandmother do it in a farmhouse in Tōno, and I still do it now in my own kitchen in Sendai. 25 years feeding a family of 7 on one income, and never once paying someone to cool a room for me. I'm not going to tell you to skip your air conditioner on a dangerous day. And that's why a Japanese kitchen barely needs it most days. My grandmother's kitchen in Tōno never once felt like the rest of the house in July, and that surprised the neighbors who visited, because everyone assumes a kitchen has to be the hottest room no matter what you do. A kitchen makes its own heat before the sun even gets involved. The stove runs, the rice cooker runs, the kettle sits there boiling for tea, and the oven works through the afternoon. The refrigerator breathes its warm exhaust out the back all day long, whether anyone is cooking in it or not. So when people ask how to cool a kitchen without gas or electricity, what they're really asking is how to stop that one room from turning into a furnace. That's on top of everything else the summer is already doing to the house. That heat doesn't leave the moment you turn off the burner either. The countertop, the floor tile, even the cabinets sitting closest to the stove soak up heat while you cook. They keep giving it back to the room for an hour or more after dinner is done, the same way a sidewalk stays warm long after the sun has gone down. A kitchen that only fights heat while the stove is running is fighting half the problem. There's an old line, often credited to a monk named Yoshida Kenko, who wrote centuries ago that a house should be built with summer in mind. In winter you can live almost anywhere, but a badly vented house turns unbearable once the real heat arrives. My grandmother never quoted him by name, but she lived by exactly that idea in her farmhouse kitchen. I still live by it now in a small apartment kitchen 2 hours away in Sendai. Decades later and worlds apart from that farmhouse. Everything I'm going to walk you through comes down to 3 plain moves. Block the sun before it ever touches the glass. Pull a breeze through the room instead of sealing it shut. And don't make heat in that kitchen that you don't actually have to make. There's a 4th layer underneath all 3, quieter than the rest, and it has almost nothing to do with actual temperature. I'll get to that one once the first 3 are sitting on the table in front of you. Here is the plain principle underneath every kind of shading the Japanese use on a kitchen window. The shade has to sit outside the glass, not inside it. Once the sun has already passed through the window and landed on an indoor curtain, the heat is already inside the room. It radiates off the glass and the curtain and the sill no matter how heavy or expensive that curtain was. Shade the window from the outside instead, and the sun never gets the chance to turn your kitchen into a greenhouse in the first place. The simplest version of this is called sudar, thin bamboo blinds hung outside a window from the eaves. People in Japan have hung them since at least the 9th century, back when bamboo itself was a luxury only wealthy households could afford. Now you'll find them cheap at almost any hardware store there, put up every spring and taken back down once autumn cools things off. The slats block the harshest part of the sun while leaving gaps wide enough for a breeze to pass straight through, so you get shade without sealing the window shut. Hang one a few inches off the glass instead of flat against it, and that thin gap of trapped air alone can keep a west-facing window 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit cooler on a brutal afternoon. The heat never gets a direct path to conduct through to the glass that way. Yoshizu is the bigger, heavier cousin, reed screens that lean against a wall or the eaves rather than hang from them. It's the kind you still see propped against beach houses and food stalls, doing the same job on a larger scale. Traditional houses added one more layer built right into the architecture itself, eaves that reached out far past the wall. They were deep enough to shade the windows and the walls from the high, direct sun of summer, while still letting in the lower, weaker sun of winter. Most modern apartments were never built with eaves like that, mine in Sendai included, which is exactly why the portable version still matters so much today. The blinds and the screens and the vines you can add back yourself. If I had to tell you to start with just one thing, I'd tell you to grow a green curtain. This means vines, usually goya, the bitter melon common in Okinawan cooking, trained up a net stretched outside the kitchen window. It shades the glass the same way stuteri does, but it also does something a bamboo blind never could. The plant pulls water up through its roots and releases it from its leaves all day long. And that released water pulls heat out of the surrounding air as it evaporates, just like sweat cools skin. A green curtain isn't just a shade, it's a small, living evaporative cooler bolted right onto your kitchen wall. The numbers behind it are real enough to repeat plainly. One measurement from a Japanese sustainability group found that a full green curtain blocks around 80% of the sun's heat energy before it ever reaches the glass. Back in 1985, a test run by the utility company Chubu Electric found that homes with a green curtain used about 30% less power on their air conditioning on average. The savings held above 20% on every single day of that test. A real estate firm testing balcony surfaces one August found a bare balcony climbing past 50 degrees Celsius in direct sun, while the balcony shaded by a green curtain stayed between 32 and 38 degrees the whole time. I'll give you the more modest number 2, because I'd rather be honest than impressive. In Tokyo, one university study tracked a green curtain over 48 days and measured a drop of only about 0.6 degree Celsius in the surrounding air. That's a smaller number than the others, but it's the most carefully measured one, and it still points in the same direction every other test does. Even large companies have leaned on this. Kyocera grows green curtains across roughly 20 of its buildings, and every summer, employees harvest the goya growing on those vines and eat it in the company cafeteria. One of those curtains alone is credited with pulling more than 11,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide out of the air over a single year, just from the plants doing what plants already do. That's the whole loop working at a scale far bigger than one kitchen window. Shade the glass, cool the air a little, and then eat the plant that did it. My grandmother's farmhouse never grew a green curtain, because in Tōno the growing season for goya barely exists, but her kitchen had sudare over every window that took a hard afternoon sun, and not one door in that house stayed shut for long once summer came. I'll get to why that mattered in a minute. For now, if you're only going to do one thing from this whole video, plant something that climbs. It costs a packet of seeds and a length of garden netting. And unlike a blind you buy once and store away every winter, it feeds you at the end of the summer besides. Here's why no door in my grandmother's house stayed shut for long once summer came. Traditional Japanese homes were built as one continuous space that could open up completely, using sliding paper and wood screens called fusuma and shoji, instead of fixed interior walls. In summer, you could slide those screens back or lift them out completely. The whole house became one open room that a breeze could move through freely, instead of a row of sealed-off boxes stopping the air at every doorway. The physical trick behind it works in almost any house built today, kitchen included. Warm air rises and wants to escape upward and outward. If you open something low on the shaded side of the kitchen and something high on the opposite side, the warm air lifts and slips out the high opening, pulling cooler air in behind it through the low one. All without a single motor turning. Traditional houses helped this along even further by sitting up on raised posts, so air moved underneath the floor itself and kept the whole house from baking off the ground. A shaded wooden walkway called the engawa acted as a buffer between the hot outside air and the rooms behind it. Some households pushed the same idea even further by opening only certain combinations of screens, narrowing the path air had to travel between two rooms, the way a canyon speeds up wind. By squeezing it between two walls. Force air through a tighter gap like that, and it moves faster, and drops slightly in temperature as it goes, turning part of the house into its own small wind tunnel, without a single blade ever turning anywhere in it. The same countertops and floor tile holding onto the day's cooking heat are exactly what that evening current is flushing back out. The kitchen gives up its stored heat into the moving air instead of radiating it at you all night long. Timing decides whether this works for you or against you. In the hottest hours of the day, closing the kitchen up and relying on the shade you already built is usually smarter, because the air outside is often hotter than the air you're trying to protect indoors. But once evening comes, and the outside temperature drops below the temperature inside, that's when you open everything you can, low window and high window both. Let the day's built-up heat pour back out before you close the house up again the next morning. Japan's own health ministry tells people to keep air moving through a room on two sides, even while an air conditioner is running, because stale trapped air keeps a room feeling hotter than the thermostat says it should. Natural materials help a little more than people expect too. Bamboo, plain wood, tatami, linen, and cotton all red and feel cooler under bare feet, and against skin than the synthetic materials filling most modern kitchens now, even when the actual air temperature is identical. It's a small effect next to shade and airflow, but it costs nothing to lean into once the bigger pieces are already in place. I still do this in my own apartment in Sendai, even without a raised floor or an engawa to help me along. 2 windows cracked open at dusk, one low near the sink and one high across the room, and by the time I'm making breakfast the next morning, the kitchen has already let go of yesterday's cooking heat on its own. Shade and airflow only get you so far though. On a still, airless afternoon with no breeze to pull through the kitchen at all, there's a third move that doesn't wait around for the wind to cooperate. It's called uchimizu, and most Japanese households do it without ever thinking of it as a method. You take a bucket of water and sprinkle it across the ground outside your entrance, or the path by the kitchen's back door, or any patch of shaded pavement nearby. As that water evaporates, it pulls heat straight out of the air and the ground around it, and the space nearby genuinely cools by a few degrees. The habit is old. It grew partly out of tea ceremony manners, where sprinkling the path was a way of welcoming a guest, and partly out of Shinto purification customs, cleansing the ground before something important happened on it. The specific use of it purely for cooling spread widely during the Edo period, roughly 200 years ago, and it never really left. Uchimizu was never meant to stand alone either. It sits inside a much bigger basket of small summer habits the Japanese group together under one word, ryo, which roughly means coolness, the combined effect of dozens of tiny things rather than one big fix. Sprinkling water by the door sat right alongside taking an evening walk just to watch fireflies or fireworks once the worst heat of the day had finally broken. None of those habits move a thermometer by much on their own, but stacked together across a whole summer, they add up to something real. I'll be honest about when it actually helps, because evaporation needs drier air to do its work, and Japanese summers run thick with humidity, often 70 to 85%. Throw water on hot pavement at noon in air that heavy and you mostly just make steam that sits there doing nothing for you. Do it in the early morning or the evening instead, on ground that's already shaded, and the water has a real chance to pull heat out of the air before it gives up and evaporates uselessly. It's a gentle local nudge, not a magic trick, and I'd rather tell you that plainly than let you expect more from a bucket of water than a bucket of water can give. There's a frugal habit tucked inside this one too, the kind my grandmother would have approved of without a second thought. The water used for uchimizu was traditionally never fresh from the tap. It was leftover bath water, rainwater collected off the roof, even the water that drips out of a running air conditioner. Letting good water go straight down the drain when it still had a job left to do felt disrespectful. My kitchen back door in Sendai gets a bucket of exactly that kind of water thrown across the step most evenings in summer, right before I crack the windows open for the night. The air it cools drifts in through those same windows a few minutes later, costing me nothing but water I was going to lose anyway. Everything so far has actually changed the temperature in that kitchen, even if only by a little. This next part doesn't change the temperature at all, and it might be the strangest, most useful thing in this whole video. Furin are small wind chimes, usually glass or cast iron, hung right at a window, with roots that trace back to the Heian period over 1,000 years ago. A furin only rings when a breeze is actually moving past it, so the sound itself becomes a signal. Your ears hear that thin ringing note before your skin even feels the air moving, and your brain reads that sound as coolness arriving a half second ahead of the actual breeze. Hang one at a kitchen window and you're cooling the room by exactly nothing, and yet somehow it works anyway. Sensu and Uchiwa, the folding fan and the flat paddle fan, do a version of the same thing on demand. A gust of air while you're standing over a hot stove doesn't lower the room's temperature by any measurable amount, but it changes how the moment feels while you're standing in it, and that's worth something too. Cooler colors on dishware and cloth, a scent that reads as clean and fresh instead of heavy, even the sound of water somewhere nearby, all lean on the same idea. Even clothing plays this trick. A yukata, the light cotton robe people still wear around the house in summer, is loose and breathable in a way that has nothing to do with lowering the temperature of the air around you. It has everything to do with how much heat your own body actually gets to shed. Researchers at Kyoto Prefectural University actually studied this directly. Their Graduate School of Life and Environmental Sciences surveyed residents about these old, low-cost habits. They found that people used them for what the researchers called non-thermal reasons: a sense of coolness, a feeling for the season, a sound they simply found pleasant. The part worth remembering is what happened next. The residents who leaned on more of these small sensory habits tended to run their air conditioners for shorter stretches of time than the ones who didn't. So the mind really does have some pull over the body here, at least enough to change how long you reach for a switch. I want to be honest about the size of that effect though. It changes how much heat you're willing to put up with, not how hot the room actually is. That's still worth something on an ordinary summer evening. It is not going to save you on the one day of the year that actually turns dangerous, and I'll get to that day specifically before we're done. All of this still leaves one heat source completely untouched, and it's the one you're standing in front of every single day. Half of cooling a kitchen is just refusing to heat it up to begin with. The easiest place to start is timing. Run the stove, the rice cooker, the kettle, the oven, even a hairdryer, in the cool of the morning or after the sun goes down. Stay away from all of them between about 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, when the day is already working against you. That's not a hardship. It's choosing when to fight a battle instead of picking the hottest possible moment to fight it. It's not just the stove that adds up either. A rice cooker left simmering, a kettle boiled twice because you forgot the first pot, an oven cracked open to check on something inside. Every one of those drops a small dose of heat straight into the room you're standing in. On a 90-degree afternoon, that dose lands on top of a kitchen already fighting the sun through the window. None of those choices feels like much in the moment. Added up over a whole July, they're the difference between a kitchen you can stand in and one you want to leave the second you're done. Even the refrigerator plays its part, quietly breathing warm air out its back into the room all day long whether you've opened the door or not. That's one more reason a kitchen never really gets a break from making its own heat. The bigger move is built right into what Japanese households actually eat in summer, and it's the piece of this whole topic that answers the video's title most directly. Sōmen, thin wheat noodles. Get dunked in cold sauce and eaten straight. No stove standing open and running for an hour. Hiyashi chuka takes that even further. You boil the noodles, fry one thin sheet of egg, and that's the entire cooking step. Everything else, the noodles, the egg, the cucumber, the ham, gets shocked in ice water and served cold with a sauce mixed from rice vinegar, soy sauce, a little sugar, and sesame oil. Zaru soba, cold tofu with a little soy sauce and ginger on top. Pickles pulled straight from a jar. None of it asks the stove to run for long. And all of it tastes like summer instead of fighting it. Here is where the whole thing closes into one loop instead of staying a pile of separate tips. That goya vine climbing up the net outside your kitchen window isn't just shade anymore once summer is halfway through. You pick it, slice it, and it becomes goya champuru, or a plate of tempura. So the same plant that kept the sun off your window all season ends up feeding you at the table that night. My grandmother Fumiko never once cooked from a recipe the way people mean that word now. She cooked from whatever the season handed her, and whatever was already growing in the shade she'd planted months earlier. And more than 3 decades later, I run my own kitchen in Sendai the exact same way. A recipe assumes a kitchen willing to sit there and cook for an hour. Most Japanese summer kitchens were never built to make that assumption. And once you stop making it yourself, you'll find you don't miss it nearly as much as you'd expect. I want to say one thing as plainly as I can, because this audience deserves plain talk more than polish. None of what I've walked you through today replaces an air conditioner on a genuinely dangerous heat day. Japan's own health guidance is direct about this. When the heat turns extreme, you turn on the air conditioner and the fan, and you keep the room from climbing. You don't wait it out on principle, because heat stroke doesn't care how many bamboo blinds are hanging in your window. What all of this actually buys you is smaller than that, and more useful for most of the year besides. It buys you an air conditioner that runs for a shorter stretch each day instead of all day long. It buys you a thermostat set a couple of degrees warmer that still feels tolerable instead of miserable. It buys you a kitchen that doesn't punish you every time you turn on the stove to make dinner. That's not a small thing over the course of a whole summer, even if it isn't a dramatic one. Even the Japanese government leaned into that same logic instead of fighting it. Starting in 2005, the Ministry of the Environment told offices across the country to set air conditioners to 28 degrees Celsius and loosened the dress code so people could actually stand wearing a jacket at that temperature. The campaign worked well enough that it grew from a few summer months into a stretch running from May clear through October. The government's own numbers credited it with cutting carbon emissions by roughly 460,000 tons in that very first year alone. By 2009, a government survey found that 92% of the public knew what cool biz was, and more than half of them said they actually practiced it themselves, not just at the office. A country-sized version of turning the thermostat up a couple of degrees turned out to be something ordinary people were genuinely willing to live with. This was never treated as fringe grandmother wisdom over there. It was national policy, tested at the scale of an entire country's office buildings. So the old ways and the modern machine were never really enemies in the first place. The mistake was ever thinking you had to pick only one of them. Start with whatever costs you the least tonight. Crack 2 windows once the sun goes down, one low and one high, and feel what the house does on its own before you reach for anything else. Or plant one goya seed by a sunny kitchen window and let it climb all summer. Try just one piece of this in your own kitchen, and come back and tell me what you noticed.